Aits Quachel Hela Siam Nights Jelacha. Tahan up to Natsune. Chislea Sineth Husaytnich. Lea Wathath Lebet the lungs. My name's Sahanup, Adam Olson. I was born and raised in the Husaytnich territory, Saanich, and live with my family, with Emily and our two children, with Joni and her children, Joni and Nick and her children, and my niece Yetza and my brother Joak, on the same property that we were raised on in the Chotlip village, Sartlip First Nation. Welcome tonight to the Connection Project. This is the third Connection Project. The name Husaytnich means the emerging land or the emerging people, and it was the name that was given to the people that survived the Great Flood here many, countless years ago. They were the people that heeded the words of Chaeltz, the creator. Chaeltz came down onto the beach because the people were not living in a good way, and he said to them, prepare your canoes because there's going to be a great flood. Prepare your families. Be ready because the water is going to rise. And it did. And those that paid attention to Chaeltz's warning were ready and they were prepared. And the waters rose and their canoes rose with it. And the big ropes that they had prepared were able to lash their canoes to the arbutus tree. As the water rose, all the land disappeared under the water. And a raven came and landed on the front of the canoe with a piece of bark in its beak. That's how they knew that the water was starting to recede. And the people that survived that flood here in this territory earned the name, or were given the name Husaytnich, the emerging people from the emerging land. And that's where we're filming tonight. Welcome to all of you who are joining us by live stream. Normally this event is done to a room full of people, but tonight, due to COVID, we're here in the Husaytnich territory. And my job tonight is to welcome you to this land of emerging people. And I chose to tell this story tonight because what you're about to see are people who have emerged. People who are embracing the life the journey that they were given, and courageously going to stand here and share it with you. And as we work through the stereotypes and the stigmas of mental health, addictions, and as we try to reconnect the mind and the body, it's important that we hear these stories. And so tonight, from the land of the emerging people, it's my honor to be able to start this evening in a good way. It's my honor to be able to welcome you all here in the room. There's very few of us, sitting very far apart from one another, with our masks in our pockets now. But to welcome all of you who are joining us through the camera to hear these stories. And I encourage you to share these stories and share this event with your friends. Because the more we can have these conversations, the more people will emerge. And one of the things that my late grandmother left me was this. She reminded me that it wasn't just the indigenous, just the Huilnguk people that were Husaytnich, that were the emerging people. But it was everybody that lives here now has a responsibility to this place that we live in. Just like everybody here has a responsibility to be lifting each other up and helping each other through these difficult times of physical and social isolation. And so with that, I would like to, I believe, introduce Emily. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Please share this event. Please help this event grow, because this event comes from a good place right here, Slee, right here, in a good place. Thank you for this opportunity. And to all of you who are about to speak, may you be filled with love and compassion and joy, and may your words flow smoothly. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. My job is done. He's done an incredible job of welcoming everybody tonight. My name is Emily Olson, and in 2018, we had our first connection project here on stage. Last year, we did it again, and this year, we found a way. And I think it's important to acknowledge just the good people who bring this event together every year. And I appreciate all of you so much. Welcome to everybody joining the live stream. I'm so glad we have the technology we do to be able to connect. I was resistant, admittedly, at first to do this where we couldn't be in a room together. But it's been proven time and time again in 2020 that we still can make connections. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I believe energy is carried in many ways, whether it's through music, sound, storytelling. But I believe it comes from us, and it can travel through cameras, through telephone lines, and all around the universe. And I'm so blessed to have, I guess, tapped into that a little bit these past few years. Because as many of you know, my story with depression and anxiety was something that limited me for a good couple of decades. And since sharing my story the first year, I was able to release so much and find my way back to my heart and my spirit that I came onto this planet to enjoy. And the speakers tonight are incredible people. I wholeheartedly believe their stories are going to change many lives. And before we start, I just want to acknowledge that the people who have been on this stage up until this point, their names need to be spoken each year. And so I'm going to run through the list of people who have shared their stories already. And if any of you are listening, thank you so much. So in 2018, these are the people who shared their stories that laid the groundwork for what will transpire tonight. Sort of making it so. Elizabeth Hall, Ian Bruce, Jeff Cousteau, Ocean Johnston, Ryan Painter, and Wendy Pickin. And last year in 2019, Jen Verscher, Rhonda Underwood, Joseph Briante, Michelle Frink, Megan Supernault, and John Close. And I'm so grateful for the work that you did the past couple of years. I want to take a moment to quickly thank our sponsors. It's been quite a challenge to raise funds for this year's event, and we had a GoFundMe, and we've had many generous donors, but we do have some sponsors who jumped right out at the very beginning. And that is the Saanich Peninsula Hospital and Healthcare Foundation, the Smith Maneuver, the Victoria Yoga Conference, and Deathly Matters, which is another incredible event who one of my team members, Linda Hunter, puts on each year, and that'll be happening soon, and I'll share information with that later. The stories are going to speak for themselves, and I just want everybody to know that you're not alone. There's tough times in life, and it's okay. It's okay to go through what you go through. There's no shame in it. And I think when we receive and accept and just allow what these bodies and what these experiences in life allow us to do is to feel things. And sometimes those are extremely hard, and we fall into difficult times. But you're not alone, and your story is worth sharing. And I always welcome new people. I'm going to continue hosting this event for as long as they'll have it. And thanks to everybody for being here. I wish the speakers all the best tonight, and enjoy the show. Thank you so much.
My name is Caleb, and I haven't spoken to my father in over 30 years. Still, I've looked up to him for the better part of my life. He was born into white South Africa, one of the most aggressively conservative and unapologetically racist cultures on the planet. But he was a dissident, and he moved his family, or his wife, and himself to England as soon as he was finished medical school. And they got set up, him with a medical practice and her making pottery. And they had my older brother and myself. My older brother's here tonight. Things were good for them by most standards. But the strict hierarchy of the British medical system started to wear on my dad, and he started looking for another place to live and decided on Canada. And he took us to Fort St. John, British Columbia, northern BC, practicing medicine out of a plane with skis where its wheels should have been, in remote logging camps and oil patches and mines and indigenous communities. He'd found this freedom and this adventure, but the 8-month-long winters and minus 50-degree temperatures wore on him, and he started looking for another place to live, a new promised land. And he found it on Salt Spring Island, or he thought he found it. And after my younger brother was born, he moved all of us to this mild-weathered, progressive, coastal kind of utopia. And again, things were dreamy for a little while, but it turned out that his rubbing up against the hierarchy was not so much a real thing, but was more in his brain, and his mental health really started to decline. He separated from his family, and he started getting into all sorts of weird stuff like rituals involving animals and drugs and strange forms of yoga and fire walking. And before long, he was institutionalized, and he ended up living on a school bus before taking his life with a knife to the heart when he was 34. Naturally, we were devastated as a family. He was brilliant and charismatic, but he couldn't realize that more than a fresh start, what he really needed was some humility and some help. And he left behind a beautiful wife and 3 young children who needed him and looked up to him and wanted him to be there. Sorry. It was a really hard time for us. And I'm having a really hard time right now. But we did okay. We moved on, and my mom, strong as ever, moved the three of us boys to Vancouver Island, to the home of the Olsen family. Adam, who you heard from tonight, was actually a kind of sparring opponent for me. He was bigger and tougher, though, and I seem to remember blood and biting. And maybe that was the training he needed for a career in politics. I don't know. Anyway, needless to say, I had some behavioral issues when I was a youngster. I had this vicious temper, and and once the kids around me discovered this, they would provoke me, and I became that kid who everyone wanted to see explode. And by the time I was in middle school, I had alienated most of the friends I had and was having a really hard time making new ones. I don't know what I would have done in that period without my mom. She was dealing with all kinds of stuff herself. She was a single mom with 3 kids in a country on the other side of the earth from her family. She was the sole breadwinner, and yet she still made time to talk with me and to listen to me and to figure out ways to help me. And while she was consistent, she was also creative. And she came up with this plan to send me to a fancy private school, something I had never even begun to consider. And she convinced me to go by telling me that I could go there and start an entirely new life. That because these kids didn't know me, they didn't know there'd be a temper to provoke. And that I could create the person that I wanted to be in my head, and then I could just go to this new school and live it out. And so that's what I did. It was amazing. I mean, it didn't come without its share of anxiety and pressure, but once I learned how to channel that anxiety into positive and productive endeavors, I started to thrive. And by the time I got to interact with the people who knew me as a hothead, I'd become an athlete and an artist, and I actually had real friends. My grades were good, and then sort of by accident, I discovered rowing, and I loved it. I loved the teamwork and the physical challenge of it. I loved the boats themselves, and I even loved the very early mornings. And it was because of rowing that I ended up going to a different private school for grade 12 and then on to Harvard for university, where I got to study and learn and be around a bunch of incredible people. It happened so fast, it seems like a dream now. I grew up skateboarding literally on the other side of the parking lot from this building one year, and then the next year I was rowing in the Harvard Varsity 8 and editing the Lampoon magazine and studying psychology. It felt like I got to be this honored guest in a kind of super fancy alternate universe. It was amazing, and I credit almost all of that to the fresh start that my mom was able to orchestrate for me back in middle school. So after I was done Harvard, I thought that I didn't need an institution to do the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be a designer and a writer. And I did. I did all of these things. And it was great. I traveled with some bands as a photographer. I worked on all sorts of different projects, design projects, from designing furniture and spaces, graphics, to products and all kinds of different things. I even met the woman that I would marry. We moved to New York together. We lived there for a while, then Vancouver, then Victoria, and now Pender Island, where we live with our alpacas, which we've been raising for the last 6 years together. We went full tilt for a long time, and it took its toll on our relationship and on each of us as individuals. And that unsettled feeling, that feeling of needing something else, started to creep in. And I always thought that I would be able to get rid of that with the next contract or the next project or the next assignment. But it never really seemed to go away. And it started to take its toll on my body. And I started to feel worn down and like I couldn't get out of my studio or out of my seat at my desk. So I took up cycling in Victoria, and I loved it. I rode like crazy all the time, and it turned my body around. And along with my body, my brain and my attitude turned around. And I started to take on more work. I was part of the design team that designed a giant real estate development in downtown Victoria. I was organizing speaking events and pop-up dinners, designing restaurants and cafes, and doing graphics and books and magazines and all kinds of stuff. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and open my sketchbook and just start writing, just start drawing and coming up with ideas and working on stuff that I had on the go and stuff that would just come to me out of nowhere. I felt like I had this incredible amount of energy. And one night, after coming home from an event, I wrote out a bunch of ideas for my friend Sam, and I couldn't wait to wake up in the morning and share them with him. And when I finally did, I called him up and I steamrolled him with all these ideas that I had for his bike company. And they included a manufacturing facility, a bike building school, a bigger team and sponsorships and all these crazy things that he hadn't asked for. And as I was telling them to him, it started to feel like these words weren't mine, like they were just flowing through me, like I was channeling something. And in that moment, I felt this energy, and I felt hands on my shoulders. And it was as though my father was holding me and whispering in my ear to remember that I'm his son. And I hadn't felt his physical presence in my life for as long as I can remember. But on that day, I really felt his hands on my shoulders and his blood in my veins. And I wept. On the street in front of my house, in my bathrobe and slippers, I wept out loud. It took me a while to calm down and get back into a regular headspace. But when I did, I had a long conversation with my wife, and what we realized was that I didn't have a great plan for my friend Sam's bike company. What I had was a real mental health problem, and that I needed to seek help. I think maybe I've made it sound a little bit more theatrical than it was. I think it was pretty, I don't know, freaky. It was a scary moment. And we had to look back on that day, that morning, and the weeks and months leading up to this to recognize just all the things that were going on in my life and why I needed to seek help. And so I did seek help. I recognized that I needed a fresh start again, but that it couldn't come from an external source. I couldn't go to a new place and just pretend. It had to come from inside me. And so I started on this journey of talking to my family doctor, getting into the mental health system, trying out different kinds of therapies and group work, taking different combinations of drugs, and spending time in the hospital when things weren't working. And I can't understate this, but when you're going through that trial and error process, especially with the drugs, if it's not working, it can be brutal. I mean, imagine that feeling you get when somebody jumps out and scares you, but imagine that all the time. Or imagine standing on the top of a telephone pole naked with nothing but infinite blackness all around you. Those are things I felt, and something that I actually experienced was being in the hospital in the psych ward, dressed in a gown and slippers like you have to be. The same old me, the me that I know, and looking around and seeing all these other people who look the same and thinking, are they looking at me in the same way that I'm looking at them? Are we all just psych ward patients doomed to shuffle around to our next check-in for the rest of eternity? It's no wonder that I started to think about suicide as well. I don't know what I would have done without my mom and without my wife. I did what had always yielded good results for me. I trusted them. And when I couldn't make decisions on my own, I let them make the decisions for me. And when I had those bad moments, when I just needed somebody who loved me to be with me, they were there. And they brought me amazing food when my only other option was stinky, steamy hospital dining services. They were incredible. They really, truly showed me how to love and how much getting through hard times like this is just about love, and not in a way that needs reciprocation or validation or newness or adventure, but in a way that just sort of is. When I start to think about my dad and how he was seeking that fresh start time after time, and how he would find himself in an exciting new situation, but quickly realize that it was just the same old self, I can see now how suicide would be the option, because failing to get that fresh start in any other way, the only way to really truly get it would be to gamble on what you'd get on the other side of death. And I've been to that place too, and I've considered that gamble. And I've come back from it to recognize what I wish he had been able to recognize, which is that we have everything we need to solve these problems that we have. We just need to reach out and access them. I recognize that I'm my father's son, but I know that I'm not my father. And I have my own son now. He's a little over a year old. And I'm grateful for him. I want to be there for him as long as I can be. I'm grateful for my mom and for my wife. Maybe it's a masculine thing to think that you'll solve problems by going into a new territory and taking over and setting up your own thing. But I'm done with that. Not just for me, but I think we should all be done with that. I think it's proven to not be the right way to do things. I want to be on side with the people who take their time, they ask for help, and they give help when they're asked for it. And I want to work on closing the gap between who I am now and who I want to be. And I know that it's not going to happen overnight. I know that it's going to take time, and it's not going to end. There's always work to do. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the group work and the therapy. I'm okay with the medication and the meditation and the diet and the exercise and whatever it takes, because I want to be here. I want to be here to do those things and to do things like this, to share my story and to make connections with people like you. Thank you.
When I was 5 years old, I taught myself how to ride a bike. I had this little blue bike, and it had training wheels on it. I brought it to my parents, and they took the training wheels off, and they were gonna go help me. And I was like, no, I can do it myself. I was starting kindergarten. I couldn't not know how to ride a bike and start kindergarten. And so I took it to the driveway, and I taught myself. I fell down too many times, but I got back up. Because that's who I was. I was tough, I was strong, I was independent, I didn't cry, and I didn't need anybody's help. When I was in the 7th grade, my parents divorced. Within that same year, my grandpa passed away. And I realized that I did need help from people. I realized people aren't perfect, things aren't perfect, and I started developing a lot of anxiety. I was going to school though. I was on the honor roll. I was playing sports. I was able to socialize. So I was fine. Middle school ended and high school came, and my anxiety was just getting worse. Throughout grade 9, as my anxiety was getting worse, I started self-harming to cope with those thoughts. I started cutting, scratching, burning myself, and it was working. The thoughts were settled down. Another thing that was happening throughout grade 9 is a few of my close friends were really struggling. Depression, anxiety, a lot of things that I was struggling with, a lot of things I would struggle with. And I thought it was my job to fix them. I thought I was supposed to keep them safe. I was supposed to make sure that they were better. And it took a toll. It became really toxic. By the end of grade 9, they were doing a lot better. They weren't amazing, but they were better. And I had time to reflect and look at myself and realize that I wasn't okay. I admitted to the psychologist I had at the time that I was self-harming. She told my mom, and I went to my doctor, and I got put on my first anti-anxiety medication. The really fun thing about medication is it often does the opposite of what it's supposed to do. So my anxiety was better, but depression showed up. And throughout the summer between 9th and 10th grade, these thoughts of suicide entered my head. They were fleeting, but they were still there. I was self-harming more. And by the start of grade 10, my mental health was declining. About a month into grade 10, I was admitted to hospital for mental health for the first time. I remember getting up to the ward and put in this room. They called it the suite. It wasn't very sweet, though. And I remember being terrified. I was crying. I was telling the nurse, I don't want to be here. But I felt validated. That little Ella that didn't need help, that didn't need to be cared for, was being cared for, being nurtured, being loved. It felt nice. I spent about a week in the hospital, and then I got discharged. I was out for 2 weeks, and I was feeling bad again, so I got admitted again. I spent my 15th birthday in the hospital, and I got discharged a day after my hospital. It was kind of like a late birthday present sort of thing. And I got stuck in this cycle of needing to be cared for, needing to be nurtured, not knowing how to do that, and then going to hospital and receiving that. I remember being terrified. I was crying. I was telling the nurse, I don't want to be here. But I felt validated. That little Ella that didn't need help, that didn't need to be cared for, was being cared for, being nurtured, being loved. It felt nice. I spent about a week in the hospital, and then I got discharged a day after my hospital. I was out for 2 weeks, and I was feeling bad again, so I got admitted again. I got stuck in this cycle of needing to be cared for, needing to be nurtured, not knowing how to do that, and then going to hospital and receiving that. I got admitted to hospital another 2 times that school year, and that summer I spent my summer in an inpatient assessment and treatment center. I got officially diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. I was put on medication, and my mood kind of stabilized. Grade 11 rolled around, and things started out fine. I was going to school, I was doing all the things I was supposed to be doing, I was successful. And about 2 months in, my mental health started declining. These thoughts of suicide were so intense. I was self-harming a lot, almost every day. And one afternoon, I was at my psychologist's office. I admitted how I was feeling, and I broke down in her office. She ended up calling the cops, and I got brought to hospital. I spent about a week in the hospital, and I got discharged. When I got discharged this time, though, I wasn't better. I was able to go to school, but I would spend the entire day in my support worker's office. I had this intrusive thought that if I went to class, my mom was gonna die, so I didn't go to class. You're welcome, Mom. Okay. And I would go home, and I would just lay in bed. I would sleep. I didn't go to school most days either, and I just isolated myself. First semester ended, January came, second semester started, and about a week into second semester, the same thing that happened in October happened again. I was at my psychologist's office. I admitted how I was feeling. I got brought to hospital. When I got to hospital this time, though, they didn't have a bed up for me in the ward. Due to my high-risk nature, they had to put me in a locked room, room 21. It's probably quarter size of this stage. Had a camera up in one corner and a stainless steel toilet prison thing in the other corner and a blue mattress on the floor. I didn't eat or drink in that room because I didn't want to have to use the camera or the washroom in front of the camera. If I needed to get the attention of the nurses or the doctors, I had to bang on the door and hope that they heard me. I was in that room for 55 hours. I started hallucinating. I was seeing spiders and ants on the wall, and I started banging my head against the floor. The staff considered this self-harm, and so they took my clothes away. They took away my underwear, my bra, and they gave me these really nice blue hospital pajamas and that mesh underwear you get when you give birth. And I felt humiliated. I finally got a bed up on the ward, and I spent about a week in the hospital, and I got discharged. When I got discharged, I was worse than when I came in. I went to this place to be cared for, to be nurtured, to feel validated, and I didn't receive any of that. I was out of the hospital for not even a week, and then on February 8th of 2019, I attempted suicide for the first time. Looking back now, I don't think I wanted to die. I was in pain, I was hurting, and I didn't know how to show that. I took a bunch of pills, and I called the crisis line, and I got brought to hospital, and I would spend 3 months in hospital. That was 3 months of me walking away in the middle of the night with no shoes on, in the snow, being brought back in handcuffs. That was 3 months of me running towards the highway, but being tackled before I could jump in front of a car. 3 months of me locking myself in the bathroom. 3 months of me refusing to get out of my mom's car and security dragging me back in. 3 months of me not seeing my friends, missing out on my high school experience, not going to parties, and it was hard. When I went back to school at the beginning of May, I realized that things moved on without me. My friends found a way to move on and manage with me not there. That was a hard reality. I also realized that my school wasn't able to support me in all the ways I needed to be, so I ended up being cross-enrolled at another school. There's a lot of stigma and stereotypes attached to this school, so that was hard, but it was a good decision. And I finished grade 11 on a really high note. And I met some new friends, and I had a really good summer. We went for late night drives and skinny dipping. I did all the normal teenager things that I missed out on for so long. And grade 12 was starting. I was gonna graduate, but I was also turning 17. And that meant I was transitioning out of the pediatric system and moving to the adult system, and that was scary. I didn't know what that was like. A year ago exactly, I had an episode where I dissociated. I felt really numb and I self-harmed pretty bad. I got brought to hospital, but I didn't get admitted, which was strange because that's never happened before. But it was a good thing because I was able to go to my winter formal I was able to get my license. I was able to go to parties. I was able to finish my English 12. January came. I started a first-year English college course. Things were going well. Things were good. And then life threw a curveball, and COVID came. And suddenly this thing that I was looking forward to, this thing I wasn't going to miss out on, my graduation, is gone. About a month into COVID, on April 7th, I attempted suicide for the second time. Much like the first time, I don't think I wanted to die. I was in pain, I was hurting, and I didn't know how to show it. I was on the phone with my psychologist, and I drove to a park. I took a bunch of pills, ended up walking back to my car, and the police found me. I remember getting into the ambulance, and then I remember waking up in a hospital bed. I was alone. Nobody was allowed to see me. It's kind of a confusing few days. I don't remember a lot of it. But it was weird, too, because I've never spent that little time in hospital. It's probably for the best, though, because I was able to graduate or have a virtual grad. I was the valedictorian at one of my high schools. I was the MC at my other high school. I got into my college program. I got a bunch of scholarships. I was successful, and I was still struggling. This one day particular in July, I spent the morning in the ER getting stitches, and then I had an appointment with a psychiatrist, and it didn't go very well. And that night, I remember laying in my bed, screaming at my mom, telling her that I couldn't do this anymore, that it was too hard, just to let me die. And she started crying, and my brother started crying, and my brother's girlfriend started crying, and it hurt me to see how much I was hurting other people. I ended up being brought to hospital that night, and in the morning, I saw a psychiatrist. And this psychiatrist told me that I was a teenager, that things would be fine when I was 25, that nothing was wrong with me. She wouldn't diagnose me with anything. I'm on too much meds. I went as far to say that if I killed myself, my dad probably wouldn't care. And I got pulled right back to room 21. I felt so invalidated. I went to that place to get help. I reached out, and I didn't get that. A few weeks after that experience, I got a text message from Emily. Said, "Are you ready to share your story?" And I don't know if it was out of spite for that psychiatrist or that I was actually ready to move on, but I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And again, mental health doesn't have a timeline. Just 2 months ago, on August 17th, I attempted suicide for the third time. This time was a lot different, though. I wanted to die. I didn't tell anybody. I drove myself to a creek. I took 3 dozen sleeping pills. I cut my arms, and I waited. Part of me was scared to die alone, or scared to die, and so I was texting with the crisis line. I guess they pinged my phone, and I was sitting in my car, a little Volkswagen Bug, and I see the flashing lights, and I was mad. I was angry. I wanted to die, and they were going to stop that. But I was also relieved. When I got loaded up in the ambulance and we went lights and sirens to the hospital, I realized it was a lot more serious than I thought. When I got to the hospital, they ran a bunch of tests, and my heart wasn't looking so good. I was at an extreme risk of having an arrhythmia. For so long, I would have wanted that. I would have wanted to potentially die. And now that that was a possibility, I didn't want that, and I was so confused. I remember laying in that hospital bed. I was breathing. I was controlling my heart waves. And I was forcing myself to stay awake because I was so convinced that if I fell asleep, I was never going to wake up again. I saw a psychiatrist in the ER, and he said to me that if I were to die, I would kill at least 2 other people. And then I started thinking, and I thought about my mom calling me and the police answering, telling her that her baby girl tried to kill herself. And I thought about my brothers going to the gym, trying to distract themselves from their little sister struggling. And I thought about my best friend, thinking that I lost the fight we were both fighting. And I thought about my grandma, and I thought about my dad. And it sunk in how this is so much more than just myself. I spent a few days in the ER, and then I got transferred over to the psychiatric emergency department. In the morning, I saw a social worker and a psychiatrist, and they brought my mom in, and they mentioned the diagnosis of BPD, or borderline personality disorder. They went over the traits: fear of abandonment, dissociation, impulse control, suicidal thoughts, suicidal actions, self-harm. All these things that I was struggling with, all these things that I was dealing with that didn't fit into depression, didn't fit into anxiety, and I thought was just me, suddenly had a name. I was able to separate myself from my thoughts, my feelings, my actions. When I got out of the hospital, I made a scrapbook. I was holding on to all these discharge papers, all these hospital bans, all these notes from doctors, patients, nurses, all these things I was holding on to for whatever reason, and I put them together and I put them in a book and I put it away. A lot of people talk about how it's okay to not be okay, and I need to remind myself that it's okay to be okay. For so long, I was the girl who was depressed. I was the girl who was anxious. I was the girl who was in and out of hospital. I was the girl who tried to kill herself. And I don't know if I put those labels on myself or other people put those labels on me, but I held on to them. I thought that if I got better and I recovered, then it meant what I went through wasn't valid, that I wasn't ever sick, that I chose to do this or was doing this to myself. And I realized that that's not true. Even though it was just 2 months ago that I was laying in that hospital bed, controlling my heart, it feels like so long ago. I've done more healing, more growing, more learning in the last 2 months than I have in the last 2 years. I'm excited for my future, and that's not something I could used to say. In 4 days, I turn 18. What? I didn't think I was gonna make it to 18. I'm enrolled in college and I'm gonna get my bachelor's degree. Again, I didn't think I was gonna do that. And I can say now that it's a good thing that I'm alive, and it's a good thing that I'm here. Thank you.
So, Caleb, you said your dad was a doctor up in Fort St. John. When you said that, I went, whoa, that's a lot to do with my story, too. My dad was a doctor up in Fort St. John. He was the obstetrician. He delivered all my friends when they were born. And I was in the honor roll when I finished high school, and I was first trumpet in the school band. I was on the basketball team, and I was a valedictorian too. How many valedictorians we got in this place? And I went off to college, and but I'd skipped a grade in school. They don't skip people in school anymore, but I'd skipped grade 2, so I was still a young guy and a late bloomer. And I was at university or college. It was only 150 miles away, but nobody knew me. Nobody knew that I was the son of the local doctor. I was nobody. And I was in pre-med. That's what my dad called it. I was in sciences, basically a Bachelor of Science program, but I was supposed to go up and be a doctor. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be the next Leonard Cohen and write the next great Canadian novel or be a musician. And I started hanging out at the Fire Hall Theater with all the artist types. And I didn't really know that I couldn't pass college classes without studying, because all my life I didn't have to study. I just soaked it up like a sponge. And I started flunking all the math courses. I was even flunking out in the English course. I decided that I would write an essay, what is poetry? But we'd just gone into blank verse. It didn't exist anymore. It didn't rhyme. It didn't have rhythm. Well, what is poetry? My big essay just kept turning around in my head. And meantime, my roommate in this little room and board house where I was staying was a French-Canadian guy who, he was hanging around with us, me and another guy who was studying to be a doctor. And we were studying all the time. We were supposedly sitting at our desks. He was really studying. And he had all his life, he was French-Canadian. English was a second language to him. And he had been told most of his life that he wasn't that bright, so he better go into a trade. He was studying to be an auto body mechanic. And while I was getting failing grades, he was getting 100% on his exams. Top of his class, best auto body mechanic. And I'd sit up there in my room and listen to him talk, and we'd have philosophical conversations. And as far as I was concerned, he was just as brilliant as I believed that I was. This began to really, it was 1972, blow my mind. And I moved out of the room and board place. I moved into the Wapiti Lodge, which was the student residence, because I wanted to hang around with the cool people. I was still this little shrimp. I was about this tall, and they were all starting to smoke. I think it was Cheech and Chong's Big Bamboo had just come out. And we'd hang around the lodge and learn about Sister Mary Elephant, who was the teacher, and she was teaching this, class, shut up, class, shut up, class, shut up. I didn't even remember the album anyway. We had it memorized. But I remember going home one night after thinking of that and writing this epic poem about the students who would rebel against the teacher. And it was going to be this rock opera. Jesus Christ Superstar had just come out. It was a big deal to write rock opera. That's what I was going to do. But I couldn't get over the fact that I wasn't as smart as I'd been told I was all my life. I wasn't nowhere near that. And this other guy, my roommate, was way smarter than he'd been told he was all his life. I just thought, this is a huge lie. I've been lied to. This is like finding out there really is no Santa Claus. And I was, why have I been told this? What's going on here? How did this happen? And maybe this is, I started to formulate all these hypotheses for why I'd been told this lie and how much else was a lie. Like, for instance, maybe this was just coming of age. Maybe this is everybody else. I was this young guy at university. Maybe everybody else already knew this. And I'd start to ask people like, so, you know why? And they'd look at me and give me this strange look. And I'd start, if they did listen and I started to explain about, you know about IQ, eh? And I'd get these strange looks. Nobody really asked me to expand and explain what I was thinking. I was not accepted. By the way, this room is all about acceptance. And I'm going to get to that by the end of my story here. But I remember leaving the university in the middle of the night. I thought if I was coming of age and I was going to write the great Canadian novel, I should just set off down the road hitchhiking. And I'd hitch around the country and I'd catch the dialect of every single province. I'd catch the Newfie dialect and I'd put it on the page and I'd hear everybody's stories. And it would all have something to do with how they thought the world was this way. But when they finally found out that there is no Santa Claus, that's what was my novel. And I started hitchhiking down towards Edmonton, I thought. I was actually heading straight back towards my hometown, back to Fort St. John, in a blizzard at 2:30 in the morning, and standing on the highway, and Beaver Lodge, the highway was right through the town, and the guy who owns the Beaver Lodge Hotel came down to the highway and said, you better come inside, there's a blizzard and you've only got a summer jacket on. And just sign this paper from the Alberta Welfare Department to say you're stranded. Don't worry, your hotel room's covered. In the morning, he put me on a bus back to Fort St. John to my parents. And I went to see the doctor down the hall from my dad's office was the doctor who had Erickson had the theory of psychology. He was the first person who actually listened to me, some of the things I said, and said, you know, you could be right about some of your ideas. Didn't really get into which parts of it were logical and which were a bit of a stretch. But he gave me some medication, haloperidol, and a dosage of haloperidol, and as long as I stayed on my medication, I would be fine. And I went through all kinds of crazy ideas to test coming of age. I went running off into a snowbank naked. I did all kinds of stuff that my parents were, this is really serious. It's not, my brothers and sisters were, what's happened to John? Anyway, Department of Highways, summer program, Opportunities for Youth. Trudeau had just been elected, the younger Trudeau, the young at that time, Pierre. And his Opportunities for Youth program, every week could work for the Department of Highways in my town. And we would just all drive out to the middle of nowhere and clean the ends of the culverts. And I would sit in the back of the van and I wouldn't talk to anybody. I'd just sit and, I was smoking cigarettes by now and I'd blow smoke rings. But the guy Darcy Alexander was the foreman on the crew, and he'd like to draw everybody off in these conversations. And we'd talk, and I talked about being crazy. And I'd tell these kind of stories and people would laugh. But I was still nuts. I was still thinking all these thoughts. They weren't really nuts. They weren't nuts at all. They were just hypotheses to try to explain what I thought this wild situation was. And I learned to fake being normal. And by the end of the summer, my parents thought it was all going well, and I went off to university. And I've already heard this. You've heard this story from the previous person. And I did a whole bunch of pills and woke up in a puddle of pink. And I was studying computer sciences. And anyway, after that attempt at suicide, I was taken home again. And back in Fort St. John, a few months later, my parents got me into a day hospital program. I could go back, move to Edmonton, Alberta, live with my grandmother, and during the day I could go into group therapy. I sat on a bench in a circle of people talking about their problems, and I blew smoke rings, and I was catatonic, and I didn't talk to most people. One of the side effects of haloperidol is you astral travel. That was one of the benefits. I could just leave my body, not like that, but like if everybody went for the coffee break, I could lay down put 3 chairs together, lay down, and I could just, and come back to my body suddenly too. Anyway, I stayed there doing this day hospital program for about 8 months. And at the end of the time, I wasn't doing much but blowing smoke rings. Everybody else was expressing their feelings and talking things out and talking. I was very uncooperative. I was forced to be there. And I thought I was being analyzed and felt like a bug under a microscope. And I didn't really open up. And finally, my counselor said, well, here's a list of professions, alphabetical list here. Pick one of these out here, and you got to get a job. You know, A, accounting, artist, biologist, baker, and reading through, auto body mechanic, cook. Oh, cook, I can do that. He said, good, cook it is. And within a week, I had a job as an apprentice cook at the faculty club at the University of Alberta, and I was cooking. I was basically a gopher. I would run between the guy who was the night cook in charge back to the walk-in cooler and grab him a bag of potatoes or some vegetables, some salads, some garnishes, and back and forth to the fridge. But I was doing something. And I did that for 4 months, and they relegated me to the dish pit. And I said, I know my rights. I'm not being an apprentice cook. I'm being a dishwasher. I quit. And I went and got a job at unease. Great place for a cook. Unease family restaurant. I was a short order cook in the morning, and I learned. Like, I could work 8-hour days. Short order cooking keeps you in the here and now, keeps you in the moment. You're busy for 2 Fridays, get the toast in there, get the bacon fried over there. You got enough hash browns ready for this, put all the plates over here, put the garnishes on, an orange twist here, keep it 8 hours a day. I was right, doing fine. But when I wasn't working and on my coffee break, I'd be looking around trying to find out, look for some explanation for why I was going this wild way. Maybe the TV's talking to me. Maybe the messages I see on this TV are actually metaphor. They're actually what's being said on, I think it was Watergate at the time, and I thought maybe I was Nixon, or maybe it was me that was being tried, and they were just speaking metaphorically. And maybe then I had other theories. I thought maybe all these thoughts that seem so foreign, so weird, maybe they're not my thoughts. Maybe they're being broadcast into my brain through the fillings in my teeth. I want you to laugh at these ideas because they are, these are this kind of things, though, that I would be able to say these things to the guys driving around in the Department of Highways van while we're cleaning culverts, and they would laugh. They would get it. I knew it was nuts, but I knew I still didn't know why the hell that changed, and I kept on looking for an explanation. But laughing at me is different than accepting me and saying, that's totally logical what you're thinking. I get it. Why wouldn't you try that? And please accept that is a perfectly logical, it's not very critical thinking. It defies logic when you jump to a conclusion with a failure of evidence, but it is what I thought. And I went through 4 years of working in one restaurant after another. I'd learned the whole menu, good, and I'd move on, but I wasn't really getting very far. My brother, who was a year younger than me, I love my brother. He took me under his wing. He took me to the parties. He called me stupid names, but that's, come here, you idiot. But he accepted me. And about 4 years into this, after probably about my 20th cooking job, I got a phone call from my brother, who was a cool guy, and he was caught flying into the Fort St. John airport with 7 pounds of pot, and he'd been busted. And his lawyer said, his lawyer had just been to a place up on Cortez Island called the Cold Mountain Institute. And he'd told him this was a really good place. His lawyer thought it was a good place for growth. And he thought Mike he should just plead guilty. He's caught red-handed. But all they're going to do is send you to a correctional institute. If you correct yourself first, you won't actually get any time in jail. And Mike called me from this place, said, I'm going here next summer. I've signed up for the 3-month program. You got to come down here and join me. This would be really good for you too. It was great. He went, I joined him. By the time he'd finished his program, he was a cook at Cold Mountain. And I went for another 3-month program. And they're drug and alcohol free. It's not a place it's not a place for crazy people to get well. It's a growth center. There was millionaires there, billionaires. There were would-be psychologists. There were doctors. There were priests. There were 26 people in my program, and we grew. And I think the beauty of the place is that it was set up to be accepting, to be healthy, to have a healthy diet, to be a retreat, and non-judgmental, loving people, to be surrounded by all that, and to be heard. I could tell all these ideas, and people would be able to sift through it and say, you got a nugget of truth there. About halfway through the program, we had a fantasy day. Everybody could act out their fantasy. One of the women in the program, for instance, she was training to be a psychologist, but she set up a little booth, like Lucy, psychology advice, 5 cents. And that was her fantasy. My fantasy was to be a guru. I thought I'd learned a lot of things, and I knew there was nuggets of truth in all these wild ideas I had. So I was a guru, Dixon, and I put posters all around all around the place that I was going to be giving this speech, and I sat in long robes, and I put a bunch of flour in my hair so it was white then as it is today. And I sat on a cross-legged in a lotus position, and I talked about the 7 myths of life. And I don't have them on my, but one was the myth of free will. But the other 6 made a lot of sense. There was the myth of money. It's just a myth. It doesn't really exist. It's in our heads. There's the myth of private property. We don't really own that. And there was the myth of that our thoughts are our own, because there is some truth to the idea. There's a collective unconscious. And I learned all these things, these ideas I thought were so strange. And the myth of intelligence is a myth. There's nobody smarter than other. We're all great, and we just grow up being told we're dumb. That was not so stupid. And the point is, by that, after I gave that speech, one of the gurus, the real workshop leaders, came up to me and said, everything you said makes sense except free will. You do have free will. You've got to think. And I've rethought that. I don't know if there's more to add. That's my journey. And that was 40 years ago, and I've had no problems, but I make sure that I get, Ben, the guy who led the program I was in, when he was saying goodbye to everybody, he said, make sure you take care of yourself because you're doing really well now. But I've had he's a world-renowned psychiatrist. Lots of people don't. They have relapses. But you're doing really well. Make sure you get 8 hours sleep every night. Make sure you take care of your diet, sleep well, express yourself to people. Make sure that you're heard. Even when I was hitchhiking around Europe 20 years later and nobody spoke my language, I made sure they could be heard. People could hear that they could hear if I was feeling good or not, and I knew that I connected with people. That's important. Make sure people know how you feel and talk about it. Connect.
Hi, my name's Susie Venuta, and I have a philosophy, and it's this, that I never know where my words, written or spoken, are going to land, and I hope the words are spoken tonight land where they need to be. The idea of this journey started way back when I was 10 years old. I don't know what sparked it. It could have been a class discussion or a book I read, but it's more likely that I started to hear the whispering in my soul. As I listened to that whisper, I could feel a gentle tug, pulling me back to a land I had never been, a place of ancestral connection that was never spoken about or acknowledged, but a place I could feel in my bones was calling me. I knew then that one day I would visit this mystic land that called. But by the age of 10, life was already complex and terrifying. Life had already chewed me up, spit me out, threw me into the gutters. I knew I was no one, I would be no one, and dreams were made for others, but not for me. So the dream of going to Ireland was pushed way back into my subconscious for the next 4 decades. While other children may have been dreaming about becoming a teacher, a doctor, or a fireman, I couldn't think that far ahead. I had to focus in the here and now, how I was going to get through each and every moment. My main goal was survival. Life was hard. Actually, life was complex and terrifying long before I started to hear my soul sing. I first started thinking about dying when I was 4 years old. I don't think I could really grasp the full concept of death at that age, but I know I wanted the pain to stop. My world was a world full of abject poverty, neglect, violence, physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. And some of it happened just a few blocks from this very theater. I mean, talk about coming full circle. As a kid, I was a walking nervous wreck, always on guard for the next attack, and I was always looking for escape routes. I dragged a huge bag of shame behind me, and I tried never ever to be noticed because notice meant having attention, and attention was rarely, if ever, good. School was a bit safer, but I still got bullied. If you look at my class pictures from Sidney Elementary, I am likely the smallest kid in the class. My clothes are out of style, and I often wore the same dress for the next class picture. I would be stealing food out of other kids' lunches out of the cloakroom, and I would be taking half-eaten apples out of the garbage. I had older siblings in that school, and so the adults had already decided I was like them. On a Friday afternoon, when I was in grade 2, somebody stole my bike out of the bike rack. So I went and talked to the principal and told her. Over the weekend, the bike was found in some other kid's yard. However, on Monday morning after school assembly in this street, on this school that is just down the street here, I got called into the principal's office. And the principal said to me, "You lied, nobody stole your bike, and if you don't admit you're lying, I'm going to give you the strap." Here was another example that the world was not safe and I could trust no one. I would suffer with anxiety and depression for decades, but I didn't know what it was. And even though my coping skills of drinking, self-harm, and risky behavior were not the healthiest, I was just trying to survive. Until in 1998, I couldn't do it any longer. I was sinking, and I just couldn't pull myself out of it. Everything took so much effort. I felt like I was walking through mud in a lead suit, and I was losing the battle. I knew I needed help. Still, it took me weeks, if not months, before I would make an appointment with my family doctor. He'd been my family doctor for about 2 years at this time, and he was Irish. And one of the first times I met him, I was reading the book, Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. And he said to me, "If you're not depressed by the time you finish reading this, if you're not depressed now, you will be by the time you finish reading this book." And I looked at him and I said, "You have no idea." He seemed like a nice enough guy, but could I didn't know him that well. And could I trust him? And I think that was the biggest question. Could I actually trust him? What was his response going to be? Was he going to say, "Pull your socks up and carry on"? Or my favorite, no shit, I was really told this, "You need to find yourself a hobby, dear." Like, seriously? Like I had been told by other doctors? But to my surprise, He listened, he asked questions, and he suspected I was suffering from depression. And I will never forget the next thing he said to me. He said, "I'm here if you need to talk, and if there's anything I can do, let me know." This was a game changer. I was then referred to the adult day therapy programs we had at our local hospital. And in time, I was referred to a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma. It was there that I was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, at this point in my life, all the flashbacks, memories, emotions, and sensations of all the trauma that happened to me was overwhelming and became debilitating. I could no longer work and had to close my 2 daycares. My husband's income was $50 more than what we would have gotten on social assistance. We lost our house. We lost our credit. We had no car, no phone. Our 16-year-old son was struggling with his own mental health challenges, and we needed to use the food bank. It was a very challenging time. In 2003, I was correctly diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which I'm going to call DID from now on because dissociative identity disorder is a bit of a mouthful. And by the way, they used to call it multiple personality disorder. When I was first correctly diagnosed, I went, "Thank God I'm not crazy," and then promptly panicked and thought, "Holy shit, I must be crazy." Because the only concept I had of this condition was on Hollywood, right? TV or the series of the week or some movie. I soon learned that while that may have been great entertainment, it wasn't reality. And in time, I learned I wasn't crazy, and that DID is actually a very creative survival tool that allowed me as a young child to survive overwhelming circumstances. DID allowed me to disconnect from my conscious awareness, what was happening, all the trauma that happened to me. And because the trauma actually fractured my psyche, it created fractured ego states. And it was these ego states that held all the memory of the trauma. This allowed me as a child and an adult to carry on as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until I was correctly diagnosed that I found out not everyone's like this. And the scattered puzzle pieces of my life started coming together. I started to understand why I had huge gaps in my memory and why I felt disconnected all my life. And then came the hard part. I started to understand how the trauma affected me as a child and continued to affect me as an adult. And this was a very painful place to be. In time, I was able to trust my psychiatrist and my subsequent counselors enough to finally start talking about what had never been spoken about before. I no longer needed to keep shoving it down only to have it erupt through the seams of my life. It was painful, it was hard work. There was times I didn't know how I was going to get through the next hour, let alone the next minute. There were times I required hospitalizations to keep myself safe, and so I can process what happened to me. And in all of that time, I never had a clue of the treasures and the gifts that were waiting for me on the other side. And then I started noticing an interesting phenomena that was happening. And it was this. Every time I processed and worked on a very difficult emotional piece, when I was done, I felt lighter, I felt less shattered and more whole. And this is the genius of dissociation. Dissociation, DID, not only saved my life, it protected the core me of who I was. It protected my sense of humor, my wonder, my sense of curiosity. It protected the very essence of who I am as a person. It was always there. It wasn't destroyed, damaged. It was just quietly waiting for it to be able to be in a safe enough place to be noticed. And once I realized this, that pull to go to Ireland got stronger and stronger. Then I started thinking, maybe one day this will really happen. So I started talking to my doctor, and I told him about this draw I have always had to this land, even though I didn't realize there was any ancestral connection until I was in my 40s. He started telling me about Ireland and places he had been. And every time he went back there, he always brought me back a stone or a pebble from a place he had been. And then he loaned me a book called The Redhead Girl from the Bog, The Landscape of Celtic Myth and Spirit by Patricia Monahan. So I took this book home and made myself a cup of tea, and I started reading. And I came to this paragraph. How could I know myself if I did not know where I was from, the places where my ancestors walked, where my body understood the way time unfolded its seasons on the land, where people still spoke a language whose rhythms echoed in my own, where history had been made by people with my family names, where the unrecorded history of ordinary loves and losses had been made by people with features like mine. When I read those lines, it's like my soul let out this huge sigh of relief. Those words were like a drink that quenched a lifelong thirst. And I knew then that I would be going to Ireland. So then I started speaking aloud that I was going. I told my family, my friends, and my therapist, and I slowly started saving. I would take whatever spare change I had and I would put it in a jar. And on New Year's Eve, I'd roll the coins up and deposit it in the bank the following week. It wasn't a lot of money, it was $80 to $100, but I was making a powerful statement. I was making a powerful statement to the world, but maybe more importantly to myself, that I am of worth, I am of value, and this was going to happen. As I became more serious about the trip, I started doing some research and soon became overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there. So I thought, I'll write Patricia Monahan, the one who wrote the book. I mean, I had nothing to lose. So at 2 a.m, I found her website and I sent her off a quick email, told her who I was, why I wanted to go to Ireland, and I asked her if she had any ideas or places that she thought would be a good place for me to start my research. An hour after I sent that email off, I came across an article that Patricia had died in 2012. Well, then I'm thinking, oh shit. Who's going to get this email, right? I'm thinking, God, is it going to be a family member? I don't want to upset anybody to remind them that they died, like they need to be reminded. So I worried about this at night and got very little sleep. But I needn't have worried. The following morning, I received an email from Michael, Patricia's husband. And he told me he was thrilled that he had received my email and was just wondering the other day if anybody was still using Patricia's book as a guide to Ireland. He then connected me with their dear friends, Barbara and Tony in Ireland, Barbara Smith and Tony Coxon. Barbara is also a tour guide. And as soon as her and I started communicating, I knew we were a perfect fit. She got why I wanted to go to Ireland. She got that I needed to take it slow. I wanted to feel the land, get to know the people. But maybe most importantly, she got that this was not a vacation. This was a journey, a calling to something deeper and ancestral in my soul. So in 2018, after 2 years of planning, 10 years of saving, and 15 years to the month of my correct diagnosis, I was on the plane about to start my epic Irish Odyssey, a 10-week tour around Ireland. Journey, actually. The first 7 weeks I was going solo, and I was using public transportation. Now, there's one thing you need to realize. Up until this point, the only solo trip I'd ever taken was a 2-night stay in Victoria. So, yeah, just a bit of a leap of faith. The last 3 weeks, my hiking buddy and friend Sherry were going to join me. This was a journey about returning home and finding myself. It was about thanking and honoring my ancestors whose genes I carry that gave me the strength and tenacity to survive overwhelming circumstances. It was about feeding my spirit and my soul, and it was about gratitude. The night before I left, I went down to our local beach and I did a smudge. And I picked up a handful of pebbles. And I had planned to drop these pebbles around Ireland when the land called. Wasn't scheduled, but I knew it would happen when the time was right. I dropped my first pebble on the 3rd day in Ireland. I was visiting a medieval town called Carlingford. And as I got off the bus, I started walking towards the ruins, but then soon felt a pull towards the water. I didn't ask questions, I just went with it. I walked across the road and onto the pier, and as I walked to the end of the pier, I stood. And as I stood at the end of the pier, with the ruins of King John's castle behind me, I gently tossed the pebble into the bay. And when I did that, it was like I was bringing my ancestors home. And with that came a lightness within me, like I had released past burdens, pains, and hurts, my own and my ancestors. And maybe this was what the trip was about. Maybe this trip and this journey was about putting old ghosts and ancestral trauma to rest. In week 4, I was on Inishmore Island, which is the largest of the Aran Islands on the west of Ireland. I was sitting outside their one little grocery store they have, eating an ice cream, and this woman comes up and starts talking to me in Irish. I had no idea what the hell she was saying. And I must have looked it, because I'm sure I had this deer in the headlight look. And then she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I thought you were a local." And inside I'm going, yeah, right, I'm home. So as we were talking, she said to me, she said, "And how do you find Ireland?" And I said to her, I find that there is a felt sense about her and that she is multi-layered. I said, it may sound strange, but I feel like I've come home to a place I've never been. I feel one with the land, the people, and the language, even though I don't understand a word they're saying, but it's like some part of my DNA remembers. And then I said to her, I come from a long line of stonemasons. And as I've had this journey of Ireland, I've been going around touching stone, be it an ancient site, carvings on a 500-year-old passage tomb, or one of the thousands of dry stone walls that follow the contour of this land. And there have been moments when I've done that it has brought me to tears. And then I said to her, I feel like I have been this dried up reed all my life, and I have finally been put in a pond. And every fiber in my being is now pulling up the water and the life-saving nutrients. And dare I do say it, the strength of my ancestors as they guide me on this journey. Well, I didn't plan on any of this. It just kind of spewed out of my mouth. And when I finished saying it, I thought, oh shit, she's going to think I'm some kind of nutter. But she got this twinkle in her eyes. And she got this big smile on her face. And it's almost like she glowed. And she said to me, I know exactly what you're saying, dear. She said, that's your Irish blood speaking. You've been in topsoil, and you have finally found the subsoil, the very thing you have been searching for all your life. I mean, I love that line. On week 6, I was on Cape Clear Island. Cape Clear Island is the most southern island of Ireland. Try to say that 10 times fast. And it's only 3 square miles. It's not a big place. And this is one of the many magical places that my family doctor recommended I visit. I love this place. I spent the week walking the land, placing my hand on 5,000-year-old standing stone, whose alignment directly aligns with the summer solstice. I had been invited to a traditional music session, and I was enveloped by the people of the island like family. And on my last day there, I wrote in my journal, I have been nourished, my tank is full, a shift has happened. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure in time I will know. Or maybe it's just the fact that I am no longer searching, that I have found something at a much deeper ancestral level. Now, I could go on for hours talking about Ireland. And I'm 60 years old, and I've learned a few lessons along this journey in this thing we call life. And I'm going to leave a few of them with you tonight. Number 1, everybody is born with an essence. It's what makes you uniquely you. And no matter what happens, nobody can take that away from you. Nobody can destroy it. It is always there. It's just waiting off on the side until the time's safe enough when it can let itself be known. Number 2, we have no idea what's around the corner. I thought my trip to Ireland was the end of my traveling. A year ago in September, I was with Outward Bound Canada, and we were doing the 170 kilometer Tour de Mont Blanc trek. This 170 kilometer hike started in France, went part of Italy, and up through parts of Switzerland. It was hard. It's one of the hardest things physically I've ever done in my life, but it was amazing. And while we were doing this, we were raising funds for Outward Bound Canada's charitable programs, which I have been a recipient of. And number 3, last but not least, but maybe the most important lesson I can leave you with tonight is this. Life whispers, so listen carefully. Thank you.
White Hasselhalt, Tahatlahap, Slachlacht, Sinxil, in Chai Squeeze Titkinate, Kinoknaki, and Sihuam. Good day, elders, friends, and family. My name is Titkinate, and I'm from the Okanagan and Shuswap nations. My name, Titkinate, means standing by water. It was given to me by my Tama on the day I was born. My English name is Elaine Alec, and I am the daughter of the late Saul Basil and Sophie Alec. I am really sad that I don't get to be there with you this evening. I woke up with a sore throat yesterday, and it's just been getting worse. So I've been taking a lot of Tylenol cold medicine. But I did want to contribute to this evening because I was really looking forward to it, and I know just how important it is for us to share our stories. I grew up on the Penticton Indian Band Reserve in the southern interior of British Columbia, And for the first 6 years of my life, I was raised by my tama, who was a language speaker. She spoke in Silkchin. And at the time, I didn't realize what a rebel she was, because I didn't realize, I never heard of the term residential school. And so I didn't realize how blessed I was until I was in my 30s, how blessed I was to have my grandmother talk to us in the language and share stories with us growing up. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother because my mom was a practicing alcoholic and my dad wasn't around. And so for the first 10 years of my life, I experienced a lot of abuses because of the alcoholism that was happening in our family and in our community all around us. And so I spent time with my grandmother, and that was the safest time that I've ever experienced in my life. From the age of 4 to 6, I was sexually abused, not by one person in our community, but by a number of people. And it was something that we didn't talk about. We knew it was happening around us, but we didn't share with people. And so I started to carry that at a very young age. And I started to carry a lot of that hurt and a lot of that shame throughout my life. And so by the time I turned 10 years old, I started smoking. And by the time I turned 12, I started drinking and became a raging alcoholic and started popping pills by the time I was 14. And I continued like that. And as I started getting older, I started worrying about myself. I started worrying about myself and wondering if other people thought the things that I did and acted the way that I did. I felt like there were things that were going on inside of my head that if anybody knew what was going on, that they would put me in a mental institute, or they would send me away, because the things that went on inside of my head were a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of thoughts of self-harm and harming others. And I didn't have anybody to talk about those things with. And so I continued to drink to numb the pain. And as I got older, my mom had been sober for a number of years. She got sober when I was 10. She asked me to see a therapist or a psychiatrist. And so I remember going to my first appointment when I was 17 years old and talking for 2 hours. And after 2 hours of talking, the therapist told me that he was going to diagnosed me with cyclothymia and told me that 50% of the things that were going on with me had to do with the chemicals in my brain, and the other 50% had to do with the trauma that happened in my life. And he told me if I was prepared to deal with the trauma and work through that, then I would see myself and feel myself getting healthier. In the meantime, he told me he was going to put me on low-dose antidepressants to help me. And so I did that for about 1.5 years, and I didn't understand what he meant by trauma. I didn't understand what that term meant, and I didn't feel like I was that I was a victim, I guess, of trauma, because the things that happened to me happened to everybody else, and we were taught not to make a big deal about it and to just kind of suck it up and move forward. And so I continued like that for a number of years, and then I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia, and continued to go through life having really high highs and really low lows. And, you know, he told me to start journaling. He said, you should start journaling and see what your patterns are. And I did start to notice different times of the year, different months, I would be really productive, and I felt, you know, I would feel really confident in myself. And then there were times where I just couldn't get out of bed, and I couldn't move or do anything. I couldn't think properly. And so I spent a number of years feeling like that. And then, you know, at the age of 23, I attempted suicide. And I took all the pills in my cupboard, and I remember laying down and feeling myself fading out, and then all of a sudden I heard laughter, and it was the sound of my son laughing, and that snapped me back to it. And I called for my husband at the time and told him to take me to the hospital. And the next day, my rheumatologist looked at me and said, "You know, Elaine, you don't have to live in pain anymore." And when he said that to me, I knew that he was talking about more than just my chronic pain. I knew he was talking about the pain that was inside of me, the pain that I didn't want to deal with. And so I made a commitment to start working on myself because I had a glimmer of hope. It was the first time in my entire life, in my entire 23 years, that I felt a glimmer of hope that things could be different. And so I slowly started working towards living healthy and learning what healthy meant. And for me, the easiest part of that was to worry about my physical health. And so eating better and working out and being active, those things were easy for me to do. And as I continued to grow and move forward, I would feel really good, but then I would start getting anxiety, and that was when my anxiety started to happen. And I wouldn't be able to breathe, and I couldn't, think, and I would get an episode or an attack, and I would think that I was dying or having a heart attack. And then I just kept working through it. And finally, I went a number of years trying to quit drinking, but I would always start again. And on my 30th birthday, I woke up after drinking really hard, and I decided that I didn't want to ever feel like that anymore. And so I continued to stay dry for a year, and then as I moved forward in that, I decided that I wanted to continue down that path because of how good I felt. And so as I started working through my sobriety, the anxiety got even worse. And I started realizing that when I was having an anxiety attack, it was a moment of feeling, and I didn't know how to process feelings. And at 31 years old, I started realizing that was what it was that I didn't know how to feel. And I was scared to feel. I was scared to feel all of the hurt and all of the pain that I had gone through my childhood. I wasn't allowed to feel, and I had that really ingrained deeply in my head and my mind that I wasn't allowed to feel. I wasn't allowed to cry. I wasn't allowed to get too happy about things. And so I started really dealing with the feelings. And as I started to feel the feelings, and as I started to cry and let go of the anger and let go of the hurt and allow myself to feel hurt and feel anger and tell myself that it was okay, the anxiety started to go away. Instead of having an anxiety attack, I would allow myself to cry. And as I started feeling those feelings, the feelings of joy started to happen. Real joy and real happiness and real love. I started to feel those things. And so, I'm 43 years old now, and I have 13 years of sobriety. And I still deal with anxiety almost on a daily basis, but I work through it now. I'm able to identify it more quickly, and I had a flare-up, a couple of weeks ago because I was dealing with something really close to home that I wasn't prepared to work through, that I thought I was prepared for. After all of this time of sobriety and all of this time of healing, I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. And so I had to go back on antidepressants about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I didn't look at it as a failure or that, I beat myself up that I should be in a better place. It was just something that I wasn't ready to deal with, and, I asked for help. And I think that's one of the hardest things for me to do as an individual is to, especially with my pride and my ego, and when things are good and when people see me in a certain way or they think I'm a role model and, that I should have it together. The one thing that I really try to share with people is that it's important to ask for help, and it's important to be vulnerable. Even today, I fight through those things. I fight through my tapes that tell me I can take care of it, I can handle it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm weak. And even asking my husband for help or telling him that I'm dealing with something, telling my kids that I'm having a hard time, telling the people that I'm working with and my colleagues, you know, on a professional level that I can't do it right now. Ever since I've started to learn to communicate in that way, I found that my quality of life has greatly improved because people are willing to step up and support or give me my space and time. And so, you know, things have changed a lot for me over the last few years. You know, I still continue to grow on a daily basis. I still continue to share my story. I feel that every time I share my story, I connect with somebody. I feel that I grow a little more. And when others share their story with me, I find that I grow and I learn, and I feel connected. You know, I think a big thing with dealing with mental health and mental wellness is feeling a connection to somebody and feeling like you're not alone, and the healing that occurs when you're able to do that. And so that's why, you know, I wanted to support this project, the Connection Project. I believe in connection, I believe in sharing stories, and I believe in the healing of that. And, you know, things will start to change in our world when we as individuals have the courage to look inward and do the hard work of healing within ourselves and sharing our story, because people will see that, and sometimes you will impact somebody that you don't even realize that you're impacting. And so I just want to hold my hands up to everybody who shared their stories tonight, for the connections that you've made, for being here to let others know that they're not alone and to let others know that they're supported. And if you're watching, I hope that you found something that resonates with you, to know that you are loved, to know that you're not alone, and to have hope, even if it's just a little glimmer of hope. That little glimmer of hope is something that can save a life. And, you know, as long as we continue to talk about these things, we normalize them, and then people won't feel so alone, they won't feel shame, they won't feel hurt, as long as we continue to share our stories and connect with each other. So even though I'm not able to be there tonight, I hope you know that I'm thinking of all of you, and I'm praying for all of you to continue to have an open heart and an open mind, to show love and understanding and gratitude to each other. And just thank you for sharing this space with me. White Lim Lim.
Hi, good evening. I'm Karen Lee White, and this is my wonderful nephew, Ames Gentile. And we're going to share a song that's a prayer, and it's called Fire Within. And it's for everyone, because we all have a fire within, and sometimes that fire burns down to an ember, and somebody has to come along, or something comes along and blows it back up again.
There's a fire within, sister. There's a fire inside. It can sanctify you or burn you alive. The fire inside. The fire inside. The fire. to be blind or choose to see. It's all just a matter of degree. Fuel it with fear or fuel it with love. Far within, far below, and far above. I see the grace in the shadow. I see the grace in the light. I see the grace in the sorrow and the grace in the joy. The mystery that lies in the heart of all that is. Forged am I in pain, and cool am I in weeping. Forged am I in pain, and cool am I in weeping. And here am I, oh here am I, oh here am I. I'm an ocean inside. The ocean inside of me is uncharted territory, and each island is unnamed. Light upon light, strength upon strength, joy upon joy, and love upon love. Absolute happiness. Pray for this, pray for this, pray for this. Forged am I in pain, and cooled am I in weeping. Forged am I in pain, and cooled am I in weeping. And here am I, oh here am I, oh here am I. I'm a universe inside. Well, the universe inside of me is uncharted territory, and each star is unnamed. The outer world I see is but a reflection of what lives in me. In me.
Thank you.